Good morning. I have been sick this week, so I'm just going to go ahead and throw a couple disclaimers out there, okay? I'm going to drink water that I don't normally drink. I'm going to sweat through this entire t-shirt, all right? Just so, like, when you start talking to your buddy, like, does he know that? I know it. I'm already headed there, all right? I've been sick for the last 7 days, trying to get rid of it, but this is not one of those messages I was willing to give to anyone else on our team, so you're going to have to bear with it, and hopefully you'll sense why in a little bit once we reach the conclusion of this message. Do you have anyone in your life who it's nearly impossible to buy them a birthday gift or a Christmas gift? Like, it's just impossible. Anybody have those people in your life? Like, you just don't know? Everyone who doesn't have their hand up now, you've got friends hooking you up with 25 items on their Amazon wish list. Like, here you go. And I think, I said to the 9:30 crowd, I think there are two reasons, but I'll give a third reason. I think people are hard to buy things for when one of three things is true. Either they have everything they could possibly want, or like my own father who's watching this right now, he just doesn't want anything. Unless I don't send something, right? I mean, just kidding. He's not like that at all. Dad, love you. And he's just a man that he doesn't have everything, but he literally doesn't want anything except for pictures of me. And so we try to keep that going. And then thirdly, there are those people who you don't get anything for because what they want, you just can't afford, right? Like, oh, they would love a new vehicle. You're just not that person to give it to them. And so they're like that. And one of the things we've been saying throughout this series we've been calling The Kingdom, we've been taking a look at what does the kingdom of God look like that God invites us into. And specifically in that kingdom, there is this king. Every kingdom's got to have a king. This king, whose name is Jesus, we've discovered a few things that I want to remind you of, or just to enlighten you for the first time. We discovered that Jesus has all what? All authority, right? All authority. Matthew 28, he said that all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. That's a lot of authority, right? Some of us have some authority. Anybody have authority? Like your roommate, you can tell them what to do. Your spouse, guys, hands. Any spouse have authority in their relationship? You have employees under you. Well, Jesus has all authority. Like every bit, every drop of authority that's ever existed is his. And then when it comes to who he is, we read a couple of weeks ago where Paul said to the Colossians that Jesus is before all things hold together in him, and Jesus created everything himself, and he created it for himself. So the question is, what do you give a guy like this? Is there anything he wants? Is there anything that would please him? Is there anything he doesn't have that he's looking for? And I want to say the answer to that question is yes. And I want to show you, and I hope what you'll see has been profound for me. I hope you'll just see something profound. I want to give you two texts this morning because in both texts are the only times in the Gospels where something happens and Jesus marvels at it happening. Okay? If you have a Bible, I'd love for you to turn to Matthew chapter 8 to start with. If you need a Bible, get your hands up because the Bible parole is coming your way. And for those of you who never like breaking the rules, I know you're thinking, Ben, I thought this was a series out of the book of Mark. It is, and we're going to get there for those of you that need to know that. Matthew chapter 8 is where we'll begin, and if you're talented enough to keep your finger in two places, Mark chapter 6 is where we'll go next. If you just received one of these Bibles, we're on page 527 for Matthew, and page 546 for Mark. Matthew chapter 8, verses 5 through 10 is so intriguing to me because in each story, it's the same topic, and Jesus marvels at both experiences, though the experiences couldn't be more different from one another. So the same topic, which you'll see in a second, somewhat the same response from Jesus, but for very different reasons. So if you would stand with me, Matthew chapter 8, we'll start in verse 5, we'll read through verse 10, and then we'll skip over to Mark chapter 6. Matthew chapter 8, in verse 5, it's talking about Jesus here in the beginning. It says, When he, that's Jesus, had entered Capernaum, a centurion, which is just another name for a Roman soldier. So a Roman soldier, a centurion, came forward to him, appealing to him, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly." And Jesus said to this soldier, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion replied, "Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." And when Jesus heard this, he marveled. Jesus marveled and said to those who followed him, "Truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith." Jesus marveled because this Roman soldier had amazing faith. Faith built upon authority. Do you see that? He just says, "Jesus, I don't have all the authority, but I do have some. And when I tell one of my men to go, he goes. When I tell him to come, he comes. When I say do this, he does that." That would be a great parenting technique if it only worked. Do this, he does it. Our kids are great, by the way, but they're not in the room. Turn over to Mark chapter 6. You're going to see the exact same verb used to describe what Jesus does in Mark chapter 6, but for a completely, in fact, an opposite reason. Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 6, Jesus is coming with his disciples to his hometown. As far as we know, this is the first time Jesus and the disciples had come back to Nazareth since this movement and relationship had begun. And it's talking about Jesus again. It says, Jesus went away from there, came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many who heard were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, and Joseph, and Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household." Don't miss these next two. "And he," that's Jesus, "could do no mighty work there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them." And he, what's that word? And he marveled. And Jesus marveled because of their unbelief. And he went about among the villages teaching. Is the amount of your faith in this king causing him to marvel? And if so, for what reason? You may be seated. Only two places in the Gospels, the history that we have from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, where Jesus marvels. And he does it twice, and he does it both under the topic of faith, but he does it for two completely different reasons, doesn't he? And I'm just amazed still a little bit that there's something we can do. There's something we as humans, there's something we can do as active participants in this kingdom that make Jesus marvel. It's exciting to me just to think about, wow, the God who knows everything, the God who puts faith in us, marvels when we demonstrate it or when we don't. So in the first story, if I told you just the two characters from the two stories, there's a Roman soldier and there's Jesus' hometown, I would have said, hey, one of them had great faith in Jesus. I mean, can't you depend on your hometown? Like if you're running for something, at least your friends are going to vote, right? Like you've got the cutest video on YouTube. You're like, go vote for this. And at least your hometown's going to vote for you. And Romans weren't soldiers. If you know anything about how Jesus' life goes, they're not usually on his side. If you just follow it all the way through. And so Jesus is just amazed at this Roman soldier, how much faith he had. And he understood the authority thing that we've been talking about. He knew that Jesus, you don't have to come to my home. You don't have to show up. Just say the word. And then you'll follow the story out and you'll see the amazing things that took place. Like just speak the word, Jesus. And then he's in Nazareth and it says they just couldn't get over this guy being from their hometown and being God. And it says about that Jesus could do no mighty work there. Lean in and listen closely so that you don't put stuff on Twitter that I didn't say, okay? All right, just listen closely. Jesus can absolutely do anything Jesus wants to do. Just let that be kind of our premise, and then I'm going to launch into some things that may sound opposite of that, but they're not. Jesus can absolutely do anything he wants to do. He can do it in my life. He can do it in our church. He can do it in your relationships and your work. He can do anything he wants to do, and he actually doesn't need our advice. And he doesn't even need our faith. But there's this desire on his part to see us exercise faith. There's this desire. This is what pleases him. Look at Hebrews 11, verse 6. And this whole chapter of Hebrews is a great chapter about faith. If you're looking to see God build your faith, I would encourage you to read it and then read the backstories of all the Old Testament characters that show up. The writer of Hebrews says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that God not only exists, that's one thing, but it must believe that he rewards those who seek him. Jesus can do whatever he wants to do. And what I'm about to say next is a big mystery to me too. But it's a mystery, but there are some things that Jesus is only going to do as a response to faith. Some people are like, Ben, why do I pray? Jesus can do whatever. There are some things Jesus is only going to do as a response to prayer. In fact, Jesus even told his disciples one time, casting out demons, this one's such a big deal, you can only get it on the other side by prayer and fasting. There are some things, the way Jesus has set it up, that he wants to be pleased. He's not looking to himself to go, can I do this? Do I have enough strength? Do I have enough authority? He's looking to go, hey, will we trust him? The question has never been, is he adequate? But sometimes we pawn it off on God as being unwilling to do great things in our lives. But maybe the question isn't, why is God not willing to do great things and to act on our behalf? Maybe the question is, why are we not willing to trust that he will? We act like God's not committed to this thing. Right? Half of all marriages end in divorce, inside the church and outside the church. You think God's not committed to marriage? 80% of all church plants fail. Do you think God's not committed to new churches? God isn't wavering on his commitment to do great things. Think about our vision here at Epic. Some of you are getting tired of hearing this, and you're going to keep getting it, okay? This ain't changing. Others of you will hear this for the first time, but our vision here at Epic is to be a church where an increasing number of people in San Francisco orient their entire lives around Jesus. Do you think God's opposed to this vision? But it's not automatic. With me? Do you think God's going, Ben, I just don't know if I would ask them for their entire lives around Jesus. Ben, just get them to compartmentalize Jesus. Don't make it that big of a deal. God is more into this vision than I or you will ever be. Let me say it again. God is not non-committal about doing great things in our life, in our church, in our city, in your relationships, and in the world. He's not non-committal about that. But for whatever reason, it's mysterious to me, but for whatever reason, he wants to do it in concert with our faith. Right? Look at the scene there in Nazareth. He could do no mighty work. Now, that's not true on its own. It's not that it's just a blanket statement. Jesus couldn't do anything. He wasn't strong enough to do anything. He could do no mighty work because there are some things he set up that are only going to happen as a response to how much faith we exhibit or the fact that we don't exhibit any faith. Now, if you know me at all, you guys know I will always war against the name it and claim it kind of teaching. But I also will war against, it's just the universe is just set up to happen a certain way, and my prayer and my faith doesn't affect it at all. We'll never go either extreme. Why? Because we can't make Jesus do anything, but he's asked us to believe him for great things. He's into good things for your life, for the church. Now, it's not a selfish desire. Jesus is not presenting himself this morning to us as a genie in a bottle that, hey, just tell him what you want, right? But he has all authority. I don't know how he'll wield it in your life or in my life as we exhibit faith, but there seems to be this idea that he's marveling at faith and he's being pleased by faith. And this morning, if he's marveling at your faith, is it because you have so much? You're trusting him for so much that you can't see? Or is it because you have basically none? What causes him to marvel? At your faith or at my faith? I want to make sure I remind us this morning, some of you for the first time, but a reminder to several of you, that this idea of big faith really is part of the Epic story from day one, and I don't want to lose that. I sat around with some friends this weekend saying, hey, what are we in danger of losing as a church? And this is one that I don't want to lose. Because I didn't wake up this morning wondering, would at least 2 people show up? But I've had those mornings here. I want to remind you that this church was started with great faith and God's response to that faith. And so many people that I know personally exhibiting faith and people I've never met exhibited faith. That this church would start. And here's the only way faith can exist. The only way faith can exist is when there's a gap between what is today and what we're asking God to bring into reality at some point. Does that make sense? That you cannot have, listen, it doesn't take any faith for me to say, God, I hope there's a day when we give away blue t-shirts. All right? That's our reality. That's our reality. It wouldn't be great faith for Lindsay to say, hey, Ben, I'm really going to try to get 4 small groups for this fall. There's no faith. Faith can only exist when there's a gap between what's present today and what we're asking God to make present. Therefore, big faith can only exist when there's a what kind of gap? A big old gap. The biggest gap in my entire life was the day that I felt God calling us to start this church and the day the church became a reality. It did seem insurmountable. It seemed like there were way too many thousands of steps. And it was so unlikely. And so what I want to do is I want to let you know how this church was started. And then I want to leverage that thought process to ask ourselves the question, what does big faith look like moving forward for this community? If you're not a part of Epic, I want you to ask it for your own community. But I want to give you some of the story at how this thing came about and how God has responded to great faith. I mean, look at the room. That's crazy. I just wanted 4 of you to show up, and God's done a little more. 9:30, great crowd this morning. This is going to be fun when we have to add a 3rd service that you will come to. No matter what AM or PM it is. It first began for my wife, Shauna, and I, and our boys. At the time, we were 31 years old. We had 2 4 and 6-year-old kids. We lived in a brand new 4-bedroom home. We had a pool in the neighborhood. I was working at a big mega church. I was teaching to about 1,000 people every week, and they were paying me good money just to do that. Like, I didn't have to do anything else. Didn't have to show up for events. I mean, I really just was the pastor, teacher guy. And that was our world. And then God brought this into our midst, and it was a big deal because our kids were small at the time. We had to think, like, how in the world can we leave and all of those things? And that's really was the first faith step for us. And then the next faith step was acquiring a staff. And so I needed to have faith to ask them, and then I needed them to have huge faith. Now, I had some incredible offers I made to them, which you'll hear about in a second. Everybody knows how startups work, right? Okay, one day it's going to be awesome, but would you say yes for this? So I called them. I did Skype chats with them. Shauna and I went to see Brad and Mary. Brad's our worship leader, and they were living in Florida at the time. Shauna and I were in the Midwest, and I hadn't seen those guys in 7 years. And to be honest, the way Brad is our worship leader today is I was getting ready to send out a bunch of fundraising messages, and on Facebook, I was on Facebook, and I was really getting ready to write Brad. Brad and Mary were doing well. They had a heart for these kind of things that we were doing in San Francisco, and Brad was a pharmacist, so I knew he had some jack, and so he was on the list of people I was going to ask for money. So I literally began to write the Facebook message to Brad. I think I ended up deleting what I wrote and said, Brad, would you be willing to would you want to lead worship for a new church in San Francisco? ? Smiley face. The reason I did the smiley face, because my kids have this tactic too, that if Brad said he didn't want to, I'm like, man, I was just kidding. We have a worship leader. Isn't that crazy? And so I was speaking at a camp in Panama City Beach, Florida. Shauna and I, with our boys, we asked Brad and Mary if we could stay one night at their home in Pensacola. Actually, Gulf Breeze. They lived in that part of Pensacola. And we hadn't seen each other in 7 years. Our kids had never met. And asked, could I cast vision one night and just ask you guys? And so I told them about the church and all the things that I thought could happen, hoped would happen. And I made this incredible offer to them, like the rest of the staff. I'll give you guys $1,000 a month if you'll move to San Francisco. I'm sure you'll have a lot of margin. I mean, come on. And then we left the next day. And I remember driving back to our home, and they called us at a place where we couldn't get a cell signal, but I believe Brad said, I hope you didn't say something different, because I've been living under a lie for the last 4 years. Brad said, hey, we just want you to know we're in. And they've moved all the way from the East Coast here. Brad did not have a pharmacy job. He had $1,000 for me a month guaranteed. That was it. Same story for Ben and Lindsay Lee. Ben didn't have a job when he moved here and didn't have a job until he had been here for 4 months, which was kind of awesome, to be honest, because it allowed him to coach baseball with me, which was a ton of fun. We didn't know anybody. We didn't have anything to do, so me, him, and Lindsay coached a baseball team. Awesome. Tim and Kristen the same way. Tim had just finished grad school. He could have gone on, I'm sure, to be executive pastor at a lot of other churches that were established, and he didn't have to make up everything we were going to do. And they all chose to come. Literally $1,000 a month is what I offered them. And from there, we moved into our apartments here, and we started this thing called a launch team. That's what we called it, but it was just the 13 of us that moved here, actually, for about 2 months. And we didn't know if anyone else would come. We were praying. We're trying to exhibit faith. And then I'll never forget the first Sunday night, the concierge from our apartment building here in San Francisco called and said, "There's someone looking for you." Girl, nobody has ever looked for us, but send her up. And so this one college student who knew us from some other friend shows up. I'm just like, okay, God, maybe this will work. And then we began to do these Sunday night things, and finally 50 adults and 15 kids joined that launch team, and we launched this church February of 2013 at the W Hotel. And just so you know, I want you to know that the faith that you sit in this morning. Right now, we love having a facility, so let me say that first. We love the fact that every day we come in, this is already done. We love the fact that that's there and that the kids' stuff is everywhere. But here's what faith looked like in those early days. Leaving our apartments at 5:30 to get to the W Hotel at 6 o'clock to unload a van and trailer. Now, we had a rule, and we asked God if it was okay. God, don't hold us responsible for anything we say between 5:30 and 6. All right, you can't use that in the court of law, anything that is said. And there would be 10 to 15 of us. Unload a trailer 3 or 4 hours just to set up for 1 hour service that we hope someone would come to, and then spend 2 to 3 hours shutting it down on the back end, moving the van and trailer, and doing that again, and doing that again. And that's what you're sitting in today. June 2011, we realized we could no longer be at the W, and so we began to look for space, and we were looking still just for setup space, and a broker in our church showed us this space, and we began to pray and believe that God was leading us here. At the time, we were 4 months old. We didn't have nearly the kind of cash we probably should have, and there were 107 people coming to Epic. But we sensed by faith God saying, go for it. Trust me. Let me do it. And he has. So the question I'm asking now is, what does it look like to have that kind of faith now, right? I don't have to have faith that God, would their church be into existence? I don't have to have faith, God, would you help us launch small groups? Or any of those things. And just so you know, like just some things God's done here in response to faith and prayers and just on his own. After the service today, you've got a special treat, but after the service today, 29 people that we didn't even know existed 3 years ago will have gone public with their faith through baptism. Look at this, guys. Did you get a booklet? We used to ask people just to write these down on their hands because there were so few of them. I'm kidding, but we just had a short sheet. It was just a one-sided sheet when the thing started. Our first time we've ever had to create a booklet, because we have over 20 groups that are going to form community all around San Francisco. In 2.5 years our church has existed, we've given over $100,000 to causes outside of Epic. Things that Epic didn't benefit from at all, except in a giving way. And so the question, I don't have answers for you, but the question is, what would it look like for us to get some big faith between what is present today and what we want to see God do? Because here's the reality. There are still hundreds of thousands of people every week that never attend a Christian church in our city. Hundreds of thousands. 2 to 4% was kind of the numbers we had when we moved out here. Hundreds of thousands. I'm not even talking about Epic. I mean any church. What will we believe God for? I want to give you a verse that we've clung to since day one, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 39. It says, but we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. Friends, faith is this active thing. It's not just a spoken thing. Can you imagine if Shauna and I and our boys were still sitting in our nice home in the Midwest just saying, God, we believe you're going to bring a church into existence. Some of us live faith that way. God, we believe you'll do it, and we assume you'll use everyone else but us. What does God do all throughout the scriptures, all throughout history? When faith gets on our heart, typically what happens is God invites us into the story. God invites you and I in to play a part. And I want to ask you, as we transition and think about the future in this fall season, will you play your part? Listen, there's a balance that Tim and I have been talking about all week, that we're super grateful and content with what God's done in our church so far. And if this is what God has for us for the future, awesome. How many people we're reaching, impact we're having, we honestly believe we can be content with that. But if God wants something more, we want to trust that he'll do something more. I want to give you 5 ways that you can play a part as we move into the fall. First, would you just pray with us on a daily basis for this church and what we're trying to do? See more people come into what God's up to, and then see people who are here really figure out what Jesus means for their life. Would you just pray? The way we're going to do that corporately is Thursday night, September 12th, right in this room, 7 o'clock, a night of prayer and worship. I think it's in your program. 7 o'clock right here. You don't have to pray out loud, so you don't have to sing out loud either, okay? Some of you will ask not to. But we're just going to ask God corporately that night as a congregation, God, would you do those special things in this season? Because on the 15th, that Sunday, we kick off our big fall series, which is called When Life Crashes, looking at the life of Joseph and how we can trust God even when it looks like he's absent. Would you pray? And then secondly, would you attend weekly when you're in town? We only do this 50 times a year. 50. You and I are out of town. I mean, the average person at Epic's out of town once every 9 days. I'm not kidding. Literally, we have 300 people here who come on a weekly basis, 600 to 700 over a month. So when you're out of town, you're free. As long as you watch the podcast, you're free. But when you're here, I would just love for you to make it a priority. I know there's lots of other options. Listen, hour and a half, it's not a massive commitment. But just to be together with this body of people who's trying to do life together. Third, I would love for you to begin, and we will make more room for your friends, I promise. But it's time to start inviting people in your life. They finally know that you go to church. Now they need to know some details about that church you go to. We want to equip you in 2 ways. When you leave today at the information table, there's a new invite card. It's just got an Epic logo on one side and a picture of this room filled up like this on the other side, so they know we're just not a cult or something. And then on that side, it's got the service times on Sundays, the website, and the address. So real simple, but an easy way. And then we just created and launched this week a new About Us video on our website. We recognize that more hits on that page than any other, so we wanted to have that be clearly communicating who we are. So you can watch that and then invite your friends to watch that, just as a 3-minute clip to see, here's who we are, here's what we're going after, here's what we're about. Fourth thing I would love for you to do is if you're not serving on one of our volunteers teams, we think we need 60 to 100 new people serving this fall. And listen, you can be super skilled or have no skills and make the team. Now, we'll tell you which team you make, but Epic Kids needs people to, listen, our family ministry is growing here. There are up to 40 kids every Sunday now. While we're doing this, they're doing all that. And there's leaders and helpers pouring into them. There's people checking them in. There's hospitality team that greets people, people that play in the band. As our church is growing, we know there must be extra musical talent out there. Give it to us, and we'll tell you if you do or don't have it. Brad will do it in a nice way, though. He's so much more gentle than I am. And there's so many ways to serve throughout the week, helping our staff. We do tons of follow-up and tons of communication throughout the week. So many ways to serve, but I would love for you before you leave today to say, hey, I want to start volunteering, and you can put your ministry area you want to do that in. You can work in our tech team. The only way that this thing makes a noise and we get to see the right thing is because we have men and women who are dedicated to putting this up every single week, and you never know them behind the scenes. So if you're a person, they did tell me yesterday, if you want to be on a hospitality team, you need to smile. If you don't like smiling, join the tech team. Only I can see their frowns from up here. And then lastly, the big one for today is not just to join a small group, but to attach yourself to that community group. If we're going to orient our lives around Jesus, you will not do that alone. I know you have great faith. I know you're a theologian, but you just won't do that alone. Not even Jesus chose to do this alone. This is a together thing. This isn't simply a t-shirt, although it's an awesome t-shirt. We think it's going to be the coolest t-shirt in Soma this month. It's not just a t-shirt, it's a value for us. Life is meant to be shared, and we're going to share it together in all kinds of ways. And I just want to ask you, first, will you believe in big faith? And secondly, as your faith grows for what God will do in our midst this fall, will you play your part? That's what active faith looks like. It's not like, God, would you please raise somebody up to do great things at the church? It's saying, God, what is my thing? What's my part? How do I participate? How do I help advance what you're up to? And so I just hope that we'll do that, because here's why. Jesus is worthy of big faith. If the Jesus you follow isn't a Jesus you can place big faith in, then he's not the Jesus of the Scriptures. And I want to invite you to see the Jesus from the Scriptures, who is alive, who has authority over death, came back to life, building his church. He's doing it, but willing to use us. An amazing privilege, one I hope you don't miss out on. Would you pray with me? Actually, before we pray, sorry about that. I knew there was one part I was missing. I want to just have a variety of people stand. I think we'll end up with everyone in the room standing as the band comes. If you were one of the 13 of us that moved out here, would you stand? That's awesome. If you ever went to one of those strange things called a launch team meeting, would you stand? Anybody? You had short hair back in those days, man. We were looking at pictures last night. Man, it must be awesome to do anything with your hair that you want to. Anybody ever attend a preview service? I know some of you are like, I don't know what that means. Preview service, we did 5 of those before we launched the church. We got one back here. Anyone go to a service at the W? Sorry, it's not as swanky at 543, but we're trying. How many of you would stand and say, I'm here because a friend invited me? Anybody get a postcard or an invite card anywhere along the way? Anybody find us on Google or Yelp? Tim, it's working. And I assume the rest of you have no clue how you got here. So I'm just not thinking of it. That cold's getting to me. Would the rest of you stand with us as we just close this out? And I've got to be honest with you. This is a great challenge for me. I think when you think about a lot of entrepreneurs, right, they launch the new thing, and then they don't know how to kind of manage it once it's launched, just to be honest. And so they either have to decide to become the kind of person who can oversee it as an established company, or they need to go start something else. And I'm not signing any contracts this morning, but I don't want to go start anything else. I don't want to go start a church in some other city because I know that will demand great faith. I want to ask God for his dreams for this place. And again, I'm not signing a contract, certainly not in blood, but I want to pastor this church as long as I live. But I don't want to do it from borrowed faith from the past. I want to begin afresh today and go, God, would you do something amazing? Not for my sake, God, not for those that attend to Epic. But guys, there are hundreds of thousands of people not standing with us today. What will you believe God for? And then how will you put feet to your faith? If we'll drop the lights, I want to pray for us. And then Brad is going to lead us in a song that just declares that we believe God's going to respond. God, I thank you for the power of your Spirit in this moment. God, I sense a response from you, God, and we can't manipulate that, and we can't make it happen. God, we can't learn enough or structure it. God, you don't owe us anything. But God, what you seem to delight in are men and women who will trust you, and a church who will trust you to do the great things, God. So much left undone so far in this city. God, would you use us to be a part of bringing your dreams into reality? And God, would you do the things that only you can do, which is pretty much most of it. But we'll play our part. Give us the courage. Give us great faith. Not random faith, but faith in the object of Jesus, the one who promised to build his church. We believe you will. We can't wait to watch, and we can't wait to be a part of it. In Jesus' name, amen.